you know there are going to be people who are going to take your words and weaponize your words against other Black people. Hi everybody, welcome to the Do You Know Black Creators Kickback. I'm Darnell.
And I'm Alyssa, and we're the creators and executive producers of the Do You Know Black game show and the Do You Know Black Kickback.
Today we're going to be diving into the latest episode of the Do You Know Black Kickback, titled Taking a Stand, and adding our 2 cents into the conversation.
So this episode is focusing on influencers' responsibility and activism. The first question Lamont asked was, do athletes and prominent figures have a responsibility to be vocal in their activism?
And I think the thing that makes this a good question for conversation for us and for anybody that's watching this is the word vocal. So it's not just about, this question is not just about, do athletes and prominent figures have to be activists? This is, do they have to be vocal in their activism? So that's what I think makes it an interesting question, but I'll let you actually give your thoughts on that answer first.
Well, I would say no. I don't agree that any athlete or a prominent figure has to be vocal in activism. I don't think that you being loud and wrong or just loud in your activism means that you're doing more or doing bigger things than other people within the community. I feel like your contributions mean more. So do prominent figures, as the rest of the Black community, have an obligation to contribute to the Black community? Absolutely. Do they have to be vocal about what they're doing? No, I don't agree that that's a necessity.
With the rise of social media and what I would call icon culture, is you have these people who have millions of followers, and all they have to really do to and this is why brands will always use them as like influencers to be ambassadors of their brands, because they know that if they speak on something, if they say something, then there are millions of people who are going to follow that. But there's a responsibility to being vocal. The first thing and the pressure that comes with it is, one, you have to be informed on a subject. The second thing is you have to be mindful that the people that you're talking to, your audience, they may not be informed on the subject. So I think we need to figure out how to create more spaces where prominent figures or non-prominent figures can feel comfortable in being activists in a way that's comfortable to them and in a way that aligns with their gifts, their abilities, and their passions. Some people, their gift that they're given is the power of like spoken word, the ability to move people with what they're saying, the ability to take information and digest that information and be able to share that information back. Some people that is their superpower. But some people, their superpower is more behind the scenes, right? Like the area where they may be passionate is, hey, like, let me mentor somebody behind the scenes. Let me donate here behind the scenes. And with the rise of social media, it kind of seems that we've skewed it where we're not really valuing the people who don't necessarily view their calling as a vocal leader, right? Just because you have 1 million followers doesn't mean that your calling is to be vocal. And if that's in somebody's true spirit, then, I don't necessarily think it's fair to set that expectation on people. And if they don't meet your expectation as a spectator, then that makes them a lesser individual because they're choosing to address it and use their platform a different way than you might choose to if you had their platform.
So, I think that we've had the conversation before about like weighing people's contributions based on how valuable you find them to be. But at the same time, that doesn't discount from the fact that somebody who has 500 followers is also doing that same thing. And I feel like that's where it gets sticky. And that's why I don't like us kind of convoluting this issue when we're saying, like, when we're weighing who's more valuable to us and saying like, you should be doing more, you should be saying more, or weighing what you're doing more because of who you are, as opposed to, there's already people who've been doing this for years and they're quiet. And why is that any less valuable to our community? It's not.
Prominent figures you have this responsibility to work towards a solution, something that's actually working, but also there's like a brand play where you also have to appease the people who are eager and waiting to see something happen. And I think that a lot of times what we kind of mistake is sometimes, like, there's a place for awareness, right? I think that there are the people who are working to drive awareness around issues, and I think that's where like the vocal piece comes in. But then you have some other people where it's like, that awareness thing is not my skill, but there's this tactical and there's this execution thing and there's this strategic thing that's moving pieces behind the scenes that I may not get the glory for because I'm not like a pitch man, right? But there are these pieces behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know what's happening. So I think that that's kind of the danger that we run when we start to hold people up to our expectations, is that we're making the assumption that we know everything that there is to know about this person's approach to activism. You have people where they do something, and that's what creates this like picture culture. It's like, oh, I gave a homeless man a meal today. But wait, let me take a picture first, right? Because it's like, it doesn't matter if you gave them the meal. What matters is that you took the picture and everybody saw you give them the meal. Do you think that people need prominent figures to be public in their activism to prove to them that, hey, you're for the culture? Or do you think that people feel that, hey, this is the most effective way and that's why we want you to be vocal?
I think that people feel like they're doing this because it's the most effective way, but I don't believe that just posting this on social and speaking and being vocal about it is necessarily the most effective way. I feel like people have differences in opinion on what effectiveness looks like in the community. We talk about this just even amongst ourselves, is that, there's different types of activism. We're not the type of people who are necessarily out in the street protesting every day, or doing things like that. But we do feel like we love the community, our community just as much. And I feel like the work that we're doing is also working to empower the community in the same way. So it's a long-term play. And I think we think about it strategically. We think about it as, what can we do to elevate our community for us? What we know we can contribute, what our gifts are, is writing, research, knowledge, and storytelling, putting the pieces together. Like, we all have our own skills and how we're going to give back. I feel like as long as you're contributing to the community, you're doing the work. But if you were to ask other people, they would not necessarily see it the same way. But I think that that's where we need to change the mentality.
Piggyback off that. So I'm gonna play the role of the person that's like maybe watching this and disagreeing with you. Okay. So
disagreeing with which piece?
Let's say I disagree with everything because I'm a troll. Okay. So let's just say I'm a troll and I disagree with everything you just said, right? So let's just say it's like, no, Alyssa, you have 10 million followers. All you have to do is just speak out about it, speak against it, right? Like, it's clear. All you have to do is just, hey, hop on Twitter and post a tweet saying this thing, and you have the ability to reach 10 million people, and you're choosing not to do it. And I feel a certain type of way about you because of that. So how would you respond to me if I'm that person?
So the issue that I have with that is the fact that, yes, you do have tens of millions of followers. And you do have the ability to reach mass audiences. But because of the fact that not necessarily everyone is educated on these topics, if you're going to have that power to do that, then you need to be educated on it. So I don't agree with, if you're somebody who has a strong opinion about something, you've done the research, you've done the reading, and you want to state that and put it out there, go right ahead. But if you're just going to go and shout out an opinion, knowing that you have you're influential and you have the power to influence all of these people's minds who won't necessarily go back and actually do the research and get the education on their own, then no, I don't agree with that.
One, I think the bias that you brought into your answer there is, I'm going to say, I think the bias that you brought into your answer, not that I disagree, but I think that the bias that you brought in is the assumption that a person with tens of millions of followers isn't informed. That was your default.
You can say that.
You didn't say it, but you implied it.
I said if you are going to have tens of millions of followers, you need to make sure that you're informed.
So, and I agree with everything you said. There's a gap in what you said in respect to my question. So the gap is I'm the troll. And the troll is saying, okay, one, because you have 10 million followers, billion followers. I don't know if anybody has billion, maybe billion followers. Let's just say that. The Rock, right? Maybe. But like you have all these followers. So it's your responsibility. There's a few responsibilities you have. The first responsibility is I expect you to speak out, period. If you are not speaking out, then that means you are a non-combatant. And if you are a non-combatant, then that means that you're on the other side. So that's one. I expect you to speak out because you have the platform. Number two is I expect you to be informed. I expect both of those things for you. So there is you do not have the right to not be informed. Once you get to a certain amount of influence, you lose certain privileges. You do not have the right to be uninformed, and you do not have the right to not speak out. That's how I feel. And if you anything short of that, I hate you. or something. So let's say that's my position. I'm just trying to think of like that perspective, because that's how some people might perceive that.
What people need to do a better job at, people in these spaces, is speaking out and defending themselves and saying that, well, I'm not speaking about this because I'm not informed. You know, if it's a sticky situation and I don't know about it yet, like, you know what, just want to let you know, like, I'm not speaking about this, I'm not touching on this because I don't know all the facts yet. You know, and I think that's perfectly acceptable and fine to do that, because, and maybe even in the past, there might have been situations where people were like, they're like, why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you saying anything? Then you get egg on your face because the facts come out and you're like, oh.
I'm going to stop playing the troll because I feel like you started to get mad at me. You know, so I would have stopped.
I was like, I was just talking about.
You was talking to me like, I teed it up like, this is not me. You know, like you started getting mad at me. I was like, yo, you and your feelings, right? And that was a passionate response. So let me stop doing that. No, like I agree. I think that's like I really think that's like an important thing here, right? Because and looping it back to like the episode of DYKB Kickback, right, where I think that there are roles for everybody, and it's important that we don't diminish the role that people are playing. Creating spaces where it's like, okay, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, amazing work, amazing what you did, and he lost a lot for it. He lost an entire NBA career for it. This dude was, like people say, he was Steph Curry before Steph Curry. This Colin Kaepernick situation, taking a knee, and it's like he used his platform publicly, and I'm not gonna get into the details of it because it's like he literally accepted feedback from a veteran that said, hey, don't sit, that's disrespectful. Kneel instead, that's more respectful. And he literally did that, and he still got flack for it. But he chose to be vocal in that way. In the NBA, I'm pretty sure Derrick Rose is involved, LeBron was involved, where they all wore these I Can't Breathe shirts, right? Like they wore these I Can't Breathe shirts to bring awareness. So there's like this piece of like, we hold the people that bring awareness to our issues in this iconic light, in this heroic light. And I commend everybody for doing that, because I do think that it's courageous to speak out, especially on these polarizing topics. But I also think that there are people that have been quiet that we don't necessarily know what they've done. The example I'll give here is Michael Jordan. A lot of times what people have gotten into is like comparing activism, right? Where they're saying, hey, Michael Jordan doesn't speak out about this, that, and the third. right? He's not vocal about it. In the 90s, he had the famous or infamous quote, "Republicans buy sneakers too." But in I think it was like 2015 or something, Scoop Jackson, he wrote an article with ESPN, and it was talking about how Michael Jordan's contributions to the Black community are much greater than you really even realize. So he started to dissect all of these things that Michael Jordan is doing for the Black community that have nothing to do with being vocal, but they're very much so driving towards an outcome. So one of the things that he spoke about was in Jordan Brand, he's very intentional about making sure that there's diverse leadership in comparison to like the rest of Nike. So that's something that he's very intentional about doing. That's one thing. It talks about like the fact that as an athlete, he's always really been into how do we empower our people economically, financially, strategically, all those things. He was very intentional about doing those things. But what he wasn't doing for years was he wasn't like marketing those efforts, for one, and he wasn't being vocal saying, hey, like I'm talking about these issues too. But what happens is all of those things that he's done have always kind of been viewed as not good enough because you're not being vocal.
Some people may not be contributing. We say this all the time when we talk about performative. I think Simone brought this up when she was talking about performative businesses that were, when the George Floyd situation happened, all of these brands that were blacking out their Instagram pages and saying, we're going to donate, we're going to do this and this and that. But for years, you know, the entire life of their business, they've done nothing, they've said nothing. And now all of a sudden something's happened and they're like, oh, they're all jumping on the bandwagon saying they're going to contribute. To me, you're valuing that higher than somebody who's been doing the work for years, regardless of whether you were in front of the camera or not, whether you were vocal about it or not. I feel like I weigh actions. Actions don't need to be vocal. So if Michael Jordan's been doing this for decades, he's been contributing, putting in the work, to me, I find that more valuable than somebody who's putting on a t-shirt or blacking out their screen and saying these things. And I feel like I can relate to that personally because like I said, I'm not on social media either. I mean, I have social media pages, but I'm not posting all the time. So because I don't post, that means I'm not doing anything. Like I'm not contributing anything. I know what I'm putting in. Like I know the time, all the hours we're putting in behind the scenes. Because I don't want to post about it, that means that somehow I'm less valid than these people who take an Instagram story every time they go somewhere. Like I don't agree with that.
I wouldn't say that somebody who blacks out their screen is less important than a person that does the work on the back end for years. I think both are equally important, but they both have to get done, and neither of those things can get dropped. I'm gonna get into something that you spoke about earlier, they also spoke about in the episode, is the idea of being loud and being wrong, right? Because in the episode, one of the people that they spoke about was Kanye. And Lamont brought up a fascinating, he was very pointed in how he said it. He said, well, when Kanye said George Bush hates black people, we were applauding him then. But then when he said something that you disagree with, now we're like, oh no, be quiet, you're wrong. It's the same Kanye, but his message is different. So our expectation of him is different. In one situation, it's like we agree with the message, so we want you to speak out. In the other situation, we disagree with your message, so we want you to be quiet. Now, I may agree and disagree the same way that the masses agree and disagree with Kanye in these situations, but I also realize the danger of the expectation is we can't necessarily tell you we want you to speak out and then put the contingency upon it saying we want you to speak out in this specific way. That's the dangerous game that we're playing.
Black people are not a monolith, and I don't agree with the idea that with what happened with Kanye, regardless of how I feel about him or anything that's happened, at the end of the day, he's allowed to feel how he feels. And just like any black person, Candace Owens can feel how she, and we'll get into this, can feel how she feels.
A lot of people roll their eyes right now, just so you know, when you said
it's name. Fine. Everybody has the right to feel how they feel, because again, we are not a monolith. And the idea that we take one person and we say, like, we throw them away because, and she's a different reason, like why she's kind of thrown away, but like the idea that the idea that we believe that we are all the same is disrespectful. The idea that we can say that, okay, Kanye, you're wrong, because we all agree that, you know, Obama is the best president and Bush is the worst president, or whatever the case is, you know. I feel like that is disrespectful to the Black community in general. The idea that we don't have our own thoughts and our own we're not making our own decisions and these things, that like if somebody says something that goes against the general narrative that all Black people are this or do this or believe this, then anyone who says something counter to that is out of their mind. Like I just don't agree with that. And I feel like we do need to give grace to people who say things that go outside what we want to hear. What I will say is that sometimes, because we've had these conversations too, where it feels like sometimes if I know that it's more damaging, that if I don't believe something that like somebody else believes within the community, and I feel like it'll be damaging to not have a consensus on this publicly, that's where I'm just quiet.
How do we, it's not necessarily that we're a monolith, but how do we figure out, how do we get on the same page about putting all of our collective resources, whether it's financially, mentally, emotionally, how do we come together and put those resources into the same thing? Because when you split all the resources among people collectively who, like just numbers wise, we don't have enough resources to get done what we need to get done, then you have an issue. But I think it's interesting because when we constantly bring up Kanye, a lot of us believe that, like, yeah, he's going through some things, like mentally, emotionally. Like a lot of us are saying, hey, like, we want to see you get help. But it's easy to kind of make that person the scapegoat for the person who is loud and wrong. But then, or uninformed, right? Because it's easy to be like, hey, this person is uninformed. But then you brought up another name, like you said, Candace Owens. And I would not say that Candace Owens is uninformed. I would say she has an opposing view. There's a huge difference there. That's your information. We're both looking at the same information, but we have different views on it, right? So what ends up happening is the way that we look at her is a little bit different than the way that we look at a Kanye, because that conversation is different, right? Like a Kanye, we say, well, he needs some help, right? With a Candace Owens, a lot of these things that she say, it's like, well, she's a sellout. But we look at this, that happens with a lot of different people. When public figures are vocal in a way that we aren't comfortable with, there's like, we collectively create a new logic. So for example, when Ice Cube, like he literally was like, hey, I got a plan. The other side wasn't bringing anything to me. And I wouldn't say that, hey, Ice Cube, you're uninformed. I wouldn't say that, Ice Cube, you're malicious.
I'm not saying to give all the details, but just to give context, the idea that Ice Cube was invited to the White House during Trump's term, and invited to come speak, and he went, and a lot of people were angry with him because he went to go speak with Trump, and he said, you know, his whole opinion was, I'm invited, I have a space, I have a seat at the table, I have an opportunity to speak for the Black community. This is an opportunity I'm not gonna pass up. You know, he was trying to set up meetings with the Democrats, nothing happened. And obviously a Republican was in power, so he felt like he had a great opportunity to speak for not necessarily speak for the Black community, but to put things in place for the Black community by going to this meeting. He's like, you know, always take the meeting, like they say, right? And he lived by that, and he went and took the meeting, and a lot of people were upset with him for that.
So yeah, and then I remember the context around that was like, even when he came out, a lot of people were like, well, you should have known better because you should know that nothing's gonna come of that meeting anyway, right? Like, so that was kind of narrative there. And then you had like the same thing happen with Steve Harvey, who I think overall, I think Steve Harvey's pretty good for us. Like, and you know, I think for the Black community, it's like, you know, he's been a good ambassador. You know, he's done some great things culturally, creatively, and from an entertainment perspective, but then also just from like a mindset. Like I really feel like his heart and his intention is in the right place. And then like there was a situation where like, you know, he took a meeting and then people were like, oh, like they were up in arms. And I think this is the difficulty that we end up having when we start putting this expectation of being vocal and this iconism, where there is this risk that the way that they move might be different than the way that you would want them to move. Sometimes I don't think we take the time to think about intention.
And who determines, you're saying the way that they want them to move, who determines whether your way is right or wrong? Like, there isn't. So the idea that you can say that because somebody is moving differently than you, automatically they're wrong. I think that that's where, as a community, we need to be more understanding and more accepting, and we need to be more open-minded, because I feel like we lose power when we do things like that. When we make ourselves so predictable that they can say, you know, all Black people vote Democrat, right? Like, all Black people do this, all Black people do that. Like, we make ourselves less powerful. We lose our power when we're that predictable, when people can make these assumptions about us based on that. Because now at this point, we don't have any power when it comes to that, because they know you're gonna vote this way, you're gonna act this way, you're gonna do this regardless. We don't need to, we don't really need to do anything to win you over. We know we have you just based on the fact that this is what your actions have done. I think as a people, for us to grow, we need to lose that mentality and literally just go back to the basics.
What I can say is, I can't control which direction you're vocal in. You might be vocal and have a different perspective, a different opinion, a different approach than I have. And I have to be okay with that. And then there might be somebody that is vocal that has the same opinion as me, and God bless that. But what I'm not okay with is somebody who puts themselves in a position to say things that, you know, there are going to be people who are going to take your words and weaponize your words against other Black people. For me, it's kind of like, and maybe this is going to be a controversial statement, but it's kind of like the modern day slave trader. You know what I mean? It's like when you allow yourself to be weaponized against your people, that's when I have an issue. So if somebody wants to disagree, go ahead, but be mindful of how non-Black people may use your words against Black people if you're going to be vocal.
We can't be selective in who we allow to speak for us and not speak for us when it doesn't suit our needs. We just need to say, like, hey, say it with love and say it to us directly. Like, don't put this out on this huge platform for other people to latch on to and now use that against us. So that's all I would add to it.
Yeah, like the spirit, the heart, the intention does matter. Like, and that's what I always measure with what people are saying, where I'm thinking like, okay, what's your intention? Because a lot of times people who have opposing views to the masses, when I look at them, I'm like, it's not necessarily that what you're saying is that crazy, but you're saying it in a way that it feels kind of hateful, and I really don't know if you're for us. So there's a huge difference between disagreeing with somebody who you disagree with their position but agree with their spirit, and somebody where you're like, hey, I might agree with your position, but your spirit is off. The last thing I'll say is something that Simone mentioned when, in response to Lamont's question, asking about non-Black people being vocal. And as she said, as long as it's not performative, it's okay. And I think that this is another danger of our propensity to overvalue public works. Because what happens is, for us, a lot of times people feel comfortable being performative because metrics, data shows we don't need to help solve problems. We just need to please the Black community, appease the Black community, and then we could profit off of the Black community without actually helping the Black community progress. And this is what happens when you put too much of an emphasis on vocal. You create room for performative work.
That can be the last story.
All right, we'll wrap. This has been the Do You Know Black Creators Kickback. Peace.